This is Business Decoded podcast with Ronnie Spellman. An informal chats with top business moguls as they share their stories of failure and success in a fun and relaxed way. Get entertained, educated, and unlock the secrets to success.
Welcome to Business Decoded with Ronnie Spellman. I am here with another friend and guest, Bill Pasha, who's the president and managing partner at the MBM AI companies. Bill, welcome.
Ronnie, thank you so much for having me. I really do appreciate the invitation.
I am glad to have you here. I know that you're in and out of Texas. You've lived around the country and I believe maybe visited a lot of parts of the world. But tell us about your company to get us started.
Well, our company started 14 years ago after 40 years of corporate leadership roles and positions at a lot of major broadcasting companies like CBS and Westinghouse and the company that owned Home Shopping Network, that founded Home Shopping Network. I sort of got to the point where I thought, gee, it would be nice to work for myself again. I had done that when I was a really young guy in high school. I had started a company like many people do, doing school dances and weddings. And those
school
kinds
dancing. Were you a DJ or?
I was.
Okay.
My career kind of started as a DJ, actually, and by the time I was 18 years old and graduating from high school, which was in the late 70s, after I paid everybody and paid my taxes, I cleared $26,783.
Wow. Doing DJ work?
Doing DJ work, yeah.
Impressive.
I think that was maybe as much as the national average was at that time, and I was still in high school. So I liked working for myself, and I had an opportunity. I was working for a company called Entercom, which is now Odyssey.
Okay.
They own radio stations all over the United States.
Hey, real quick, don't lose your thought, but Footloose was one of my favorite movies.
Yeah.
And that inspired me to want to dance and be a DJ, right?
Yeah, people are inspired by a lot of different things.
Right.
My career was inspired when I was 8 years old. A young man at WKNR in Detroit in the 60s said to my sister, whom he knew, hey, would your brother like to do a Coca-Cola commercial? Because he worked at WKNR.
Right.
And the next thing I knew, I was a little guy doing a line for a Coca-Cola commercial.
Interesting.
And by the time I was 12 or 13, I had the bug. I wanted to do it for a living. And so I did.
It's amazing how an event like that can really change the direction of your career.
Yeah, it really does. And I think that there are a lot of career and life-changing events that occur along the way. And that was sort of the case in 2010. Both my wife and I lost our fathers in 2010 within weeks of each other. And I was at a funeral, at one of the two funerals, and a gentleman from Europe, who is a well-known European industrialist who owns actually the largest privately owned broadcast network in Europe, said, hey, I'm kind of having some problems with my company. Do you want to come and work for me? And I said, no, I don't wish to move to Europe. I have a young son who's in school and playing baseball, and I love Dallas where I live. And he said, well, would you consult? Well, it happened that my contract with Odyssey, at that time Entercom, which is now Odyssey, the second largest broadcaster, it was coming to an end. And my contract was written in such a way, when I moved from CBS to that company, it said that if the contract ends for any reason whatsoever, they needed to pay me a fair stipend.
Oh, wow.
So as it got to the end, I kept telling them, guys, I'm going to leave. And they didn't believe me. And when it came to the day, they said, you haven't signed your contract. I said, I told you, I'm going to form my own company. I've already incorporated it. So please write me a check. And they said, well, what do you mean you're quitting? I said, yeah, well, that's a reason whatsoever.
Right. And
so they did. They were very magnanimous about it, and they did, which gave us the funds to launch.
Now, real quick, though, how did you build that into that contract? That is a unique.
They needed somebody. I was available. They needed somebody fast, and they wanted to get the deal done very quickly. So I said, well, I'm concerned that perhaps you're hiring me to get me out of one of your markets.
Oh, interesting.
So I need this. So in my first deal, it had that language. We did the deal in a matter of 2 or 3 hours.
Wow.
And so it was in there, and then as it was renewed in subsequent years, they just never took it out.
Okay.
And, they made the mistake of trusting me. No, that's terrible.
Right.
We had a wonderful relationship. It was a great company.
That's amazing, though, that you had the wherewithal to have that language in there. A lot of people don't really think of those contract-type language nuances that could be important.
Well, I had spent so many years in corporate roles. In fact, when I left the company, I was their corporate vice president of programming and audience measurement. And I had negotiated probably easily 150 or 200 talent deals for people. And, I had the benefit of working opposite some of the best attorneys in the country who do these things for a living. So, if you don't ask, you don't get.
All right.
So,
that's an amazing point, and that's a good Business Decoded tip. If you don't ask, you don't get.
And that one actually comes from my wife, who is also my business partner.
Right.
She has been in the marketing and selling game for years and years and years. And she always says to me, if you don't ask, you won't get.
Right.
And it is absolutely true. And I think that many of us through our lives, professionally or personally, we're hesitant to value ourselves highly enough.
Right. Agree with you.
So
how did this person overseas at one of the largest companies abroad find you while you were going through this transition with a family member, your father?
Well, this individual was at the funeral. He knew the family.
Okay.
I had known him since he was in college. We're similarly aged.
Okay.
And he went to school at Boston College. And my wife's sister went to school at Boston College. In fact, with the exception of my wife, I think her entire family is a Boston College family. And at any rate, I had done some work years previous to that for his father, his late father, just helping him launch some television stations in Istanbul.
Okay.
And so it was just fortuitous. And so I started working with them. I was in the beginning, I was planning on being there maybe a week, a month for a couple of years. It ended up being anywhere from 180 to 230 days a year. I was I based myself in Istanbul. I flew all over Europe going to different companies and in different situations in different countries. And I would fly home on the weekends to watch my son play baseball, and then usually on a Thursday afternoon, and then fly back on Sunday night. And it was pretty rigorous for about I guess for about 5 years. And finally, I came to my senses and found other people in Europe that could help me with some of that. Right. So my travel curtailed, and we started focusing on the United States and Canada.
Okay. So what's neat is, and that's I think another Business Decoded tip, is the timing. Sometimes you don't know when that'll occur. So you're grieving a family member. This person happens to come into town and then approaches you about a business opportunity. And then two things happen. So you had a contract already in place to work with this person. And then you had a transition package that kind of gave you the funding and flexibility to start your business. And those two combined to create your business.
Yeah, I was very fortunate. That first client valued me very highly. And he was willing to provide to me not just an incredible service fee, if you will, for what I was doing, but also, all of my travel, all of my expenses, all of my housing. That was really wonderful. I was very fortunate when I started the company. The first person who came aboard with me was a gentleman named David Perlman. David Perlman was the co-COO of CBS.
Wow.
It's a
big name.
Yeah. Prior to that, he had been the co-founder of American Radio Systems, which merged into CBS. And he was the architect of that merger, which was over $1 billion. It was,
wow.
at that time, the largest broadcast merger in history. So this gentleman is brilliant.
Right.
And he had been instrumental in getting me to my prior job at Entercom. And when one thing led to another, I said, I'm not a sales guy. I'm a content guy. I'm a process guy. I'm a research guy. I need somebody that really knows the business aspect. And he very kindly joined the company, and he is still with us today. He, of course, works in his own pursuits.
Sure.
But he also works with us on all of our major projects.
Bill, and that's an interesting point that I'd love to pause on for a moment. So you recognize an area of strength that you didn't have. And a lot of people, a lot of business leaders and entrepreneurs, they get so focused on trying to know everything and pretending to be an expert in everything. And then they just struggle. But you reached out to someone who knew that business side and said, why don't you join me? And I think that if you can just talk to us more about that element, because that is a person who's self-aware, and you recognize that you needed someone to balance you out in that specific area.
Well, I think that no one is successful without people who believe in them, first of all.
Right.
No one is successful without people who have very different skills from their own, who can make the individual look good.
Right.
I have been very fortunate through my career. I've had wonderful talent on the air. I've had wonderful support people, many of whom started working with me in what many would interpret as being very negative or adversarial situations. Yet 30 years later, 40 years later, we're still all great friends, and many of those people work within my company. There's a gentleman in Canada. His name is Dennis Kuchera. And Dennis has been with us almost since the very beginning. He is a member of the Canadian Directors Guild. He was president, I think, of that at one point in time. He's one of the color correction experts in the world.
Very impressive.
He does all of our television work with us. But I met Dennis when I was 13 years old. He produced a cable television show that I started my career with called What's Going On. Boy, there's a teenage name, isn't it? That was supposed to appeal to kids.
Right.
And we stayed friends over the years. He went off to Ryerson University in Toronto and became quite well known in Canada, and we still work together today. There's a gentleman in Maryland, Steve Dreppard, who has been a big part of our company since the very beginning. Not only is he one of the nation's great voiceover talents and production guys, but he is a visionary when it comes to audio content. And we started in a very adversarial position. I joined the company where he was. He had been the interim person holding the job that I took.
Oh, wow.
And so, as you might well have imagined, it could have been not such a great situation. Instead, he welcomed me with open arms. He helped me acclimate, and we worked together for 11 years through 9/11 when we worked together to, I think, create unbelievable community service during that day and the days that followed. And as recently as last year, he was still the executive producer for our sports play-by-play that we did for some NCAA teams for baseball.
That is incredible.
So yeah, he's so you put great people around you.
Agreed.
And they just make you look good.
That is very true.
And that's probably my best skill.
But what's intriguing though is that you just didn't put anyone around you. You put the top of the top, best of the best. I'm amazed that they joined you and that you were able to build that kind of rapport and connection for people that were very successful in their own right.
I think that is as a result of what a company's goals are. If the company's goals are fun and interesting, and if you, as a corporate culture, if you put people way ahead of your profits, and you hear that all the time, but the first time I ever actually saw that happen was a gentleman named Steve Dodge, who was the founder of American Radio Systems and who had brought together a number of different cable companies to form a much larger cable company. And when I first met Steve, I had been working for the company that owned Home Shopping Network for many years.
Right.
And when they recruited me, I really wasn't sure that I wanted to go. And my wife had a physical situation that she was trying to take care of, and it had delayed me. And it delayed me a very, very long time. But I finally joined the company. And the first day I walked in, and here's the CEO, and he's sitting in my office. And he's at my desk, and he stands up and he moves around.
This is the CEO of HSN?
No, this was the CEO of American Radio Systems.
Okay, right.
And he stands up and he walks around and he points at the chair and he says, "That's your chair." He sits down across the desk from me. And the first question he asked, I figured he was going to say, "What is your vision?" I figured it was going to be business related. He said, "Tell me about your wife. How's she doing?"
Oh, wow.
And I said, that's an amazing question. I wasn't anticipating that. He said, "If you look at our core values, we put people before profits. We always will, and you need to too." And I thought that was a wonderful thing. You brought up HSN. The gentleman who founded Home Shopping Network was a gentleman named Bud Paxson.
Okay.
And Bud Paxson was an incredible visionary. He was among the very, very first people to consolidate radio and television stations. He was the first person to put a truly viable Christian network on the air.
Interesting.
In the worship network. He also put people way, way ahead of anything else in his business. He was a top businessman. Sometimes he was ruthless,
right.
But he also taught his people important lessons, especially me, if you were willing to sit and listen. And he, too, put the very, very best among the best into his company. I don't know how I ever made the cut. So it was really, truly incredible. In fact, one of the people who was in that company, who is still a very good friend today, Steve Street,
right,
was originally a DJ. He was a program director at a radio station in Orlando, Florida, when I joined the company in the corporate position. Steve decided one day that after doing radio for many, many years, he had this idea. And his idea was, would people who can't get credit cards put money onto an empty credit card? And he formed the Green Dot Corporation.
Oh, wow.
He knew nothing about finance and ended up on the Federal Reserve. So,
wow.
Bud had some pretty smart people working in that company. So I've just been fortunate. I've always been around brilliant people.
So what big lesson did you learn from him at HSN? I was just looking up. It looks like they're now owned by the same company that owns QVC, but what an amazing history. Been around for 47 plus years.
That's true. Bud founded that company by accident. He owned a little AM radio station in Clearwater, Florida.
Right.
And one week he could not make his payroll. And so he went out to a gentleman who was way behind in paying for his advertising, and he said, "I need you to pay." And this guy said, "I don't have any money, but I have some toaster ovens." So Bud loaded those in his car, and he went back to the radio station. And the young lady who was on the air, he said, you need to step aside. I'm going to go on the air. And he began to describe on the radio these toaster ovens and how wonderful they were. And he sold like 200 of them in a matter of about an hour and a half. And he went home, and his wife said, "What if you did that on TV?" The rest, as they say, is history.
That is amazing.
When I got to him, he had already, or he was in the process of, or had actually just closed on selling Home Shopping Network, and he started the first Florida-only radio network and television network, which expanded across the nation. But he was a brilliant guy who those of us who worked for him really miss.
You know, and that's really intriguing for an entrepreneur. You have these toaster ovens that you have no idea what to do with, and then you come up with this concept, but it's that moment afterwards where you think, aha, this actually worked. This could be a business.
Necessity is the mother of invention. And, you know, we've heard that over and over. Our business at MBMI Companies was primarily radio, television, digital, up until 2014-ish, when we were fortunate enough to run into some people in the restaurant business and in the alcohol retail business who said to us, hey, you know, the things that you do in broadcast could be applied very nicely to our businesses. The next thing we knew, we were in ownership partnership with Jose Andres and with the Dream Group, which is a big part of the ownership behind the world-famous restaurateur slash meme generator Salt Bay.
Right.
You know, he owns all sorts of steak restaurants all over the world. And so all of a sudden we had 3 of their restaurants, 2 of them at the Star, 1 downtown, that we were working with. And that expanded into the Consolidated Restaurant Group, which owns Cantina Laredo around the country.
Oh, interesting.
Three Forks. And from there into the Gibson's Restaurant Group and the Davio Steakhouse Group. And it just kept steamrolling as CEO talked to CEO who talked to CEO. And when 2020 came and everything shut down, we quickly learned that if the restaurant business didn't exist, we were going to have to pivot in terms of what we were marketing. And all of a sudden, we were working with med tech firms like Inspect IR Systems, which came up with the breathalyzer for COVID. And now they have a wonderful device that sniffs out forensic identification of drugs and organics. It doesn't matter what the container is. It takes the place of dogs. You know, one of the deep, dark secrets that nobody likes to talk about is that when a drug-sniffing dog sniffs, any sort of drug that is dangerous, and there are many out there, that dog can have very negative physical reactions up to and including passing away. Oh. So this device removes all of that possibility by replacing those dogs. It's also obviously not $100,000 to train the dog.
Sure.
So we worked on the original training films for them. We were fortunate when a joke that we had been making about the breathalyzer for COVID ended up on Jimmy Fallon, and that sort of led us into doing a lot of public relations. So our business has just expanded.
How did you get that on Jimmy Fallon?
That is a long story that is better untold, probably. But you know, of all of the creative people in the country, of the many, many creative and outstanding late night show hosts, in my personal and whatever professional opinion I have, I think that he is truly the giant among giants.
Sure.
He is just multi-talented in so many ways that the Carsons and the Lettermans, you know, they were all great, but they weren't Jimmy Fallon.
Yeah. And Johnny Carson, definitely a huge fan. A great program.
Amazing, an amazing program with longevity that we will probably never see again unless it's Jimmy Fallon.
Right. So if you don't mind, walk us back through. You founded in 2010. You had a pivot in 2020. But tell us what the company did from 2010 to 20. Like, what was your business model?
Well, we really had at that time 4 companies. We had the original company, Multi-Brand Media International, which was the first MBMI. It did work inside of all of the broadcast fields, the digital field, and we were fortunate enough to partner with a little-known company called Cover Media out of London. Cover Media is in the top 3 organizations that provide high-resolution photography, images, video, and editorial in the entertainment and lifestyle space. In fact, many of the things that you see that are tagged Getty are actually Cover Media's.
Okay.
Many of the images that you would see in Elle magazine or in a New York newspaper, these are Cover Media images that we as MBMI represent in North America.
Interesting.
For Cover Media. They have been our longest term partner and one that is extremely valuable in terms of our friendship and relationships.
Right.
I wouldn't trade my relationship with Cover Media for anything in the world.
Hey, Bill, take a quick transition there. Cover Media, so they manage the assets. You said, so they manage photos and other related assets.
They do. In fact, they have stringers all over the world. And all of these assets, especially the videos, are available in multiple languages. People just don't realize that they're Cover Media's.
That's really neat.
Most radio and television stations and newspapers and magazines, they white label.
Right.
And just as well. So that was part of the first company. The second company, after we became involved in alcohol retail and strangely, one of our first non-broadcast clients was a manufacturer of pet supplies in Slovenia. They have a $65 American dog leash that is very specialized, and we helped them open up the North American market in parts of Russia. And the marketing company just grew and grew. I used my research background. I had been on the advisory board of Arbitron, which is now Nielsen, for over a decade, and
really
done
for
a lot
Nielsen?
Well, Nielsen bought Arbitron.
Okay.
Arbitron was the largest provider of research for radio, Nielsen for TV, and they finally merged.
I don't know if people know much about Nielsen these days. Now, it was a really big deal when I was growing up when you had 3 television stations and maybe 2 auxiliary PBS stations. But Nielsen, and they're still active, but they seem like they're more in the background from a visibility standpoint. But back when I was growing up, it was a big name.
Nielsen wants to be invisible. That is their goal. It helps them collect objective data.
Right.
The way that they engage with what they call Nielsen families, the people who actually are monitored, in most cases electronically, to measure what they consume in media.
Right.
That process is highly guarded. I think I'm probably still under an NDA. I know I am. It is, however, a premier lesson in how to do research right. I've been very fortunate in working with researchers too. I worked with a gentleman named Ted Rossetti, who, along with his friend Gary Marintz, when they were very young, when they were teenagers, they invented text to speech and speech to text,
right,
which they put into the public domain.
Right.
I've been fortunate to work with Larry Rosen. His company, Edison Media, is the company that does almost all of the polling for all of the networks for political campaigns.
Interesting.
And you pick up some of what they know through osmosis.
Right.
And because they are superhuman, as a regular human, you can often sell what you've learned from them to others and do a better job than many would be able to. But yeah, Nielsen was, Arbitron in my case, was pretty interesting, and it prepared us for consumer research in the marketing company. And we still are very active. We have a wide range of clients. We do product introductions. I still do a fair amount of voiceover for national clients. And then we have a third company here in North Dallas, a company called Frisco Eats. Frisco Eats is a digital company that provides a meaningful relationship between restaurant owners and managers and their guests, their customers. It was originally supposed to be a .com, and it was just never developed that way. Our company owns the service mark on any city name eats.com.
Oh, wow.
So it's morphed over the years.
Okay.
And then our fourth company was
EATS.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Okay.
And then our fourth company was a company called Valorient Safety. And Valorient ceased operations during COVID for all the reasons that you might expect. We protected high-value entertainers, high-net-worth entertainers. And when they stopped touring, it no longer became a viable business for us, and we sold that business. But we now primarily deal with the marketing company, which also provides a ton of other business services. We have a couple of developers that we provide everything from CEO, administrative assistant, virtual administrative assistants to
that's a growing segment, by the way. That's been growing the past 10 years or so.
Yeah,
virtual assistant.
Yeah, so is fractional marketing officers.
It is. Yep.
And we really that is really what we do. We are really fractional marketing officers. Although we have designers who do mechanical work and all the things that you would expect, we are really fractional marketing officers, and we have made it a point from the very beginning that when a client or a potential client wants to talk to us, they will talk to one of only 3 or 4 people. Right. Generally, it will be either me or my wife, Debbie. We are the only 2 partners in the business. Right. But sometimes they'll also talk to David Perlman or overseas to Robert Bunduzis, who is in and of himself probably one of the most interesting people I've ever met in my life. And we try to keep the faces forward because people who deal with us want to know that we are personally invested in their businesses. Right. We don't advertise. It's always CEO to CEO to CEO. The only time we've ever advertised was at trade shows. Okay. They weren't particularly meaningful in return to us. But
trade shows you have to manage really carefully. Now, Bill, we're at the end of our show, but I want to ask you just your final thoughts. You've given some really great insight on Business Decoded tips. What other brief tips can you give to our listener on starting a business, building the right market brand for you? Now, we'll have you back on the show so we can delve more in the detail. But what 2-3 tips would you give our listeners as a final closing remark to help them unravel how to build a successful business?
I kind of usually stick to 5.
Okay.
One of them is ask every question you have without fear. I think that no one who matters will ever hold it against you if you don't know the answer to a question. And those who do know the answers are usually eager to help if you ask politely. And I think that helps launch people the right way. The second thing that I'm a big believer in is voracious reading.
Okay.
If you read tirelessly and with vigor, I think that the opportunity is always somewhere in the story. But if you read critically, because I think not every story or storyteller is truthful, right? You will do much better. My third is usually make research-based decisions, but make sure that your research is sound. Led Zeppelin said in Stairway to Heaven, because sometimes words have two meanings.
Right.
So you have to be really careful about the garbage in, garbage out.
Right.
And I think that we're really good at discerning what's garbage and what isn't. The fourth, and I think is very important, is there's always a way, and you cannot be too diversified. People say, oh, you have to really focus. I was very fortunate early in the business to be seated at a dinner next to Jeff Immelt, who at the time was the CEO of General Electric.
Yeah, General Electric.
And I said, he asked me what I did, and I told him, and I said, you probably think I'm too diverse. He said, let me tell you my greatest lesson for you, if you don't mind. I said, please do. He said, at General Electric, if people want a refrigerator, they come to GE. Appliances. He said, if they want a jet engine, they come to GE Aviation. If they want $500 million, they come to GE Capital.
Right.
And he said, throw everything against the wall, and if it sticks, sell it. If it doesn't stick, fix it and sell it. Right. And I thought that was really, truly great, because there is always a way. And then maybe the most important, and it took me a long, long time to learn this, is celebrate your successes along the way.
Right.
One of my very favorite people in life is a former MLB baseball player named Jason Jennings. Jason Jennings is most noteworthy as I think it was 2000 or 2001 Rookie of the Year in the National League. And in his first game against the New York Mets, pitching right-handed for the Colorado Rockies, he was called up. His equipment didn't make the airplane. He was using somebody else's equipment. He threw I think it was a 5 or an 8 hit shutout, complete game shutout.
Oh, wow.
He got his first hit, and he hit a left-handed home run. And as he walked off the field, he was stoic. And the announcer for the game in New York that day said, come on, son, let's see a grin, because it's never going to be that easy.
Right.
And I think that we have to celebrate. When we celebrate, our bodies want to do it again and again.
Right. Right.
And if we focus on the negatives, it'll do that again and again too.
Right. Bill Pasha, thank you for joining us on Business Decoded. Wonderful insight.
Thank you.
We'll have to have you back again.
I would enjoy that very much. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Business Decoded podcast with Ronnie Spellman. Please be sure to subscribe and share, and stay tuned for more incredible Business Decoded episodes.